serious. What is your small-town dark secret story? Story 1. Not very secret, but our neighborhood school was so cheap it stayed open full-time through the school year until now just get a bonus from the government. It had a total of 30 kids who got corona in my grade alone, and that's out of the 140 people in my grade. 3 cases were hospitalized, and the state finally came in and shut the school down right before Thanksgiving break. The elementary had 20 kids cases and 30 faculty cases. Middle school had 73 cases and all. And the high school had 85 cases, including me. I wasn't asymptomatic either. It sucked. Story 2. This might get lost, but there was, and I think there still is, I don't live there, a small local charity society that met at a local restaurant. One of the biggest things they did was a clothes and food drive, usually around the holidays between Thanksgiving and Christmas. They would take donations throughout the year, but this was the only time they advertised it or had members actively out collecting clothes/canned food. There were rumors that some members would use these donations to lure in homeless people in a different adjacent city and murder them. There was an investigation by the police, but it went nowhere. There is, however, a small spike in missing persons reports around that time of year in that city. This sounds like it should be a Simon Pegg movie or something. It isn't a Simon Pegg movie, is it? Story 3. There was a weird kid in our village growing up, a few years older than I was, who committed self-termination. But he didn't do it any of the usual ways. He spent weeks building a goddamn guillotine above his bed, attached in some way to an alarm clock so that when the alarm went off, down it would come. Of course, the alarm kept going, so his dad came in to find his head rolling on the floor. Story 4. Some high school football players shoved broomsticks up freshman players' butts in the locker room after a practice. The coach found out and did nothing about it. The whole town knew when nothing happened to anyone in the form of punishment. Every game for the rest of the year, opposing teams' fans brought broomsticks to games. Edit. Many have asked which town this is. I'd rather not say specifically, but it is in the northern part of Illinois. Circa 2002 to 2003. Edit number 2. The amount of different cases that have come up in this comment section have blown me away. I'm so happy I shared this to shed some light on how much larger this problem is than I thought. Story 5. This is a sad one to me. There was an older couple here who ran a halfway house for troubled kids who'd recently gotten out of juvie. They fostered a few as well. They were loved in the community, wonderful people. One of them had an older brother who was a gangbanger in the nearest big city. During a visit, he snuck his 15-year-old younger brother a handgun. Younger bro ended up holding up a local gas station and killed 3 people. One of them was my friend's cousin. The foster parents lost whatever credentials they needed to do what they did, the kids went back into the system, and the giant house has been abandoned since around 2009. Halfway houses and foster homes can be tough enough situations as is, but this is really depressing to hear. I hope those kids are okay. Story 6. As a teen in high school, the health teacher got caught sleeping with students. Everyone magically passed that year, including me, who skipped almost every day, lol. Then a few years ago in another small town, 2 different scandals within the space of 5 years. First one, teachers at a preschool were dosing children with melatonin at nap time. Second one, a very well-known and respected funeral home went under investigation for selling body parts. Edited to clarify events were in different towns. Story 7. About 10 years ago, a lot of homeless people disappeared, and when the police did the investigation, they found out a guy was kidnapping and eating those people. Police found his hideout and found a half-eaten body and bones from another person. People don't like to talk about it, but everyone knows what happened. Story 8. There were rumors that there was a secret passage from the village's churchyard to the coal cellar on our grounds, which were used by Jews to hide and flee from Nazis. Not sure that qualifies as dark. Really, if those passages are real, they should be located and preserved. There are still things historians, archaeologists, and anthropologists can learn from them. 200 years from now, they would be even more important to those studying that time period in history. The United States didn't preserve much of the Underground Railroad infrastructure, mainly due to its necessarily transient nature. And that's a shame, as it could tell us things that personal accounts cannot. Story 9. Maybe not dark so much as wild. When I was in first grade, a guy called the police from multiple different phones saying there was a bomb in each of the schools in the town, 3 elementary, 1 middle, 1 high school, and all of the schools were evacuated. Turns out while the entire police force was split up, he robbed a bank and got away with it. with all the awful stuff that had happened in schools over the years, that is in really bad taste, but on the other hand, that is one clever bank robber. Story 10. Two sisters got picked up by a group of men. Both were arred and thrown off a bridge that is 45 minutes outside of town. One sister survived, but later in life went back and jumped off the bridge. Story 11. This was around 15 years ago, but there was a sheriff's deputy that was seemingly a really cool guy. Friendly, cracked a lot of great jokes, etc. He was working at the local high school as a school resource officer and was apparently almost universally well regarded. Well, it turns out that he repeatedly arred a 14-year-old. He told the boy that he'd kill his parents if he reported the officer. I don't remember all the details, but I believe this went on for weeks or months before it was found out and the officer was arrested and eventually went to prison. Story 12. Oh, I have a doozy. Short version, popular kids in high school run a secret toe fight and accidentally kill one of their friends in the house of a local politician, who proceeds to bury the story. Towel fight club. Tape towels over your hands and beat each other up. It's supposed to be just boxing, but it sounds like they got out of control and hardly could call it that. The first rule of towel fight club, don't do a towel fight club. Story 13. There's a half-submerged submarine from the war in the bay where I live. You can walk out to it in the high tide. In the late 80s, somebody cut open the hatch, one of the only visible parts left sticking out of the sand, climbed in and was having a look around. The tide came in and he drowned. If I remember rightly, the whole hatch was filled with cement, then welded shut to stop it happening again. Story 14. In my country, crime is pretty high and weird crap happens all the time. Basically, the closest I have to a small-town dark secret is when a manhole was overflowing with 2 aborted fetuses from some back-alley abortion clinic washed out of it. The police released a statement saying that you shouldn't use these clinics despite the fact that there are literally adverts for it everywhere for years. Story 15. A state forest makes up about 2/3 of my rural New England town. The forest is infamous for satanic rituals, animal sacrifices, and cult worship. In the late 70s, early 80s, there were actually a few human sacrifices related to the satanic cult rituals. Needless to say, I don't go into that forest alone. I mean, but aren't you kind of curious? You might be able to find some really cool stuff, like a satanic cult. Story 16. Our local pizza place was a known KKK hub. Everyone knew it, and still to this day, if you Google Town KKK, the first thing that pops up is this pizza shop. They had some nasty butt pizza, too. Edit. This place is no longer owned by members of the KKK. It was sold about a decade ago, and the new owners have been trying to get rid of that reputation ever since. Story 17. This is more comical than dark. A house burned down in this smaller town of 600 population, 1 block from the fire station. It being a volunteer fire department, no one was at the station. They tried to get the pumper truck out, but one of the volunteers had run it into a brick building the week before and it was still at the shop. We're still undecided whether the house owner burned it down for the insurance. Strange that there was nothing valuable inside. And here I was going to question just how comical this could be with how it started, but yeah, that is kind of funny. Story 18. In the 80s, a restaurant in a small town in South Brazil became famous by their great pastel and the delicious ground beef in it. Someday following a tip, the cops found lots of rats in cages at the second floor of the place. The owner was using rat meat for a long time, they discover. Story 19. The new police chief's bachelor party was held at a local strip club. It was videoed when video was new. The cops broke in looking for a tape which was also recorded. New chief lost the job within a month. Where else would someone have one? Applebee's? That's so dumb. I used to bounce at a couple different strip clubs and taking pictures/recording is illegal and the bulk of what my job required me to stop. What did the club have to gain from releasing that footage? If there's someone I want on my side owning a place like that, it's the police chief. Story 20. Town in Africa I visited as part of a uni thing basically had a guy way back when who was running to clean up the area. Apparently there had been a lot of white murders, some ritualistic things where the ears were being cut off, and at the time, white voters had a lot more power than black voters there. Anyway, his campaign is he'll stop the white murders and he gets elected on this hard-on-crime attitude and suddenly they stop. Everyone's super stoked until time goes by and they are not just reduced but non-existent overnight with no real action or people brought to justice. Anyway, everyone starts investigating him. Eventually, this spills over to a bunch of folks forming a bit of a mob and charging into his office to try to find a ledger for paying off the gangland people. They don't find a ledger. They found an earbox. You know, I knew from the moment that I read that they stopped that it was the guy who was elected, but it was still every bit as satisfying to read that last sentence. Story 21. The school resources officer ended up sleeping with a senior at the high school. He was fired, but they ended up staying together and now have 2 kids. The cop now works at Goodwill. They are happy. Similar story here. McDonald's manager in my town, who was in his 50s, had an affair with a high school senior in 2011. They ended up getting married a year later and have been together since. The weird part is, he has a kid who's in the same class as his new wife. So the poor kid not only went through a rough divorce, but now he has a stepmom that is the same age as he is. Story 22. The mayor of the town I live just outside of was murdered by his girlfriend a little while back. And there was a realtor that was using his company as a front for smuggling drugs. Other than that, it's the usual small southern town crap. That reminds me of another small town by me. A local doctor was operating a pill mill. He got caught and his wife murdered him because she was afraid of getting caught up in the fallout. Yet now she's in prison for life. Story 23. The town I was raised in wasn't exactly small, but here's the one dark secret I know. My hometown was where lots and lots of sports players had their mansions. And so, of course, their wives and children were out and about in the community a lot. Every single sports player wife in that town is heavily addicted to opioids. Every single one. Opioid addiction is obviously an epidemic all over the country, but among the rich wives in the town, it has a 100% infection rate, so to speak. I know because one of my friend's mom was the hairdresser for basically every single one of those wives. I was homeless my senior year of high school, and one of the sports players' wives heard about me from her, and she gifted me an iPhone. That phone was pennies to her, but I still wish I'd expressed my thanks more, because that wife died of an overdose not long after. Sorry if that wasn't much of a dark secret, but yeah. I mean, you ended it with an overdose, so it was pretty dark. Otherwise, yeah, I suppose opioid addiction is kind of normalized now. Story 24. There was a woman who was cheating on her husband and got pregnant with him. When she had the child, it was quite clearly not the husband's child, so he kicked her out of the house. The woman broke down and went out drinking. Then, when she was about to return to her husband, she picked her baby up, dropped it down a rubbish chute, and left it there. The next morning, she remembered what she did and went back to find the baby, but of course, only people with access to the chute can go inside, so she had to wait hours, probably days, for someone to unlock it and go inside. The baby was long dead by then. The woman killed herself shortly after. This developed into a ghost story later. People say you can hear the baby crying from inside the rubbish chute, and you can hear the woman crying on one of the stairways. Story 25. We have a vineyard hill next to our village. On that hill, there's a big wooden cross. Lots of people go there to drink, have a walk, or with their dogs. But almost nobody knows why the cross is here. During war, a vineyard keeper lived there with his son. His son was recruited and the man was left alone. When the war ended, his son survived and wanted to prank his dad by sneaking on him at night. But vineyard keeper saw him and thought he was a robber, so he grabbed his rifle and shot the robber. When he found out it was his son, it broke his heart. He dug a grave on top of the hill for his son and erected a big wooden cross next to the grave. When he was done, he laid next to his son and shot himself. From that day, no one worked on the vineyards, and there's a big wooden cross on top of the hill. Now you can't even recognize there's a grave. Story 26. Some dude that owned a froyo shop knocked one of his female employees unconscious, and she woke up inside this soundproof room in said yogurt shop, bound up and wearing a diaper. She managed to escape and get the cops called. Story 27. I used to do pest control in rural West Texas, and one of the places I serviced was a church in a town called Hamlin. Turns out Joel Osteen's father was a preacher there decades ago, before he went to Houston and started his megachurch there. But why did he leave Hamlin, Texas, and head south, one may ask? Well, according to the pastor of the church in Hamlin and everyone that worked there, it's because Joel's father had an affair and knocked up his mistress. Word quickly spread in small-town Hamlin, and Papa Olstein was pretty much run out of town. He went south, ran another church somewhere for a bit, and then made his way to Houston, where he founded the megachurch that his little bastard Antichrist would eventually become famous for. Looks like sleaze and dishonesty runs in the Olstein family. Why doesn't that surprise me? Story 28. In Taiwan, there used to be a serial killer that would murder females in his taxi and turn them into xiaolongbao, pork soup dumpling. He would eat them and sometimes sell them. Story 29. 2 houses down from my granny, a couple lived there with their 5-year-old autistic son. The husband goes missing. The wife says he just walked out. His family files a missing person report because that's not like him. The police show up to investigate, and the wife tells them not to go in the basement because there was just a water leak. The police says okay and don't look down there. Turns out she was keeping his body down there. She was cutting off pieces and burning them at her parents' house in the country. The messed up part is the kid was in the house the whole time but couldn't say anything because he is nonverbal. The police messed up big time. The guy's parents ended up hiring a private investigator to figure out what happened. Story 30. Some decades ago, one of the teachers of our elementary school was a pedophile and would regularly take a pupil with him up to his lodge when he did stuff. The people that were harmed are now in their 40s and either need lots of therapy, damaged beyond the point where therapy can bring them back, or dead, self-termination. Knowing this and then looking at the poor weirdos of our village, I feel so sorry for them. Story 31. Look up the Gainesville Ripper. Killed a bunch of students and dismembered the bodies in really gross ways. This was about 30 years ago. I guess it's not really a secret if there are podcasts about it, but it's slowly being forgotten. Story 32. Not too dark, but yeah, shady as F. Guy, blue collar, but running for a local political office, comes home to his wife of 7 years. Finds her being shagged by some guy. He whips out a gun and shoots the guy a few times. The man survives. Finds out that his wife was cheating on him and it wasn't R. Here is where it gets dirty. So, the police want to press charges against him for attempted murder, since they say he knew his wife played around. So the DA comes to him and tells him to stop running for office and withdraw. He does, and the charges go away. No crime here, folks. I mean, that's pretty dark, but not terribly surprising. Also not terribly secret to learn about shady crap going on in politics. Story 33. We had a pedophile that got caught because he told his friends his plans to go kidnap a girl and R her and not plan letting her live. This was a senior at our high school, so he was 18. And not to mention his collection of CP. Story 34. A dead girl washed up on a beach in my town, pumped full of H. I guess everyone knows who did it, but the evidence to convict was lacking. The guy who supposedly did it is a local schizophrenic who posts on Facebook paragraphs of nonsense and pictures that make no sense. His older brother is actually a great young guy who owns a small business and is a great addition to the community. Me and my friends were all 13 to 14 when this happened, so it became almost a dark kid running joke about how he just got away with murder. Story 35. When I grew up, there were murders, swingers, S-abuse/pedophiles, corrupt law enforcement, and gang violence. Place had a population of about 600 people. This event was so bad, Coastville was removed from maps for a bit. I borrowed this from our Wikipedia page. In August 1911, steelworker Zachariah Walker was lynched in Coastville. He had left his wife and children in Virginia while seeking better work. This African-American man was accused of killing Deputy Constable/coal and iron policeman Edgar Rice, a popular figure in town. Walker claimed self-defense and was hospitalized after his arrest. He was dragged from the hospital and burned to death in front of a mob of hundreds in a field south of the city. The 15 men and teenage boys were indicted, but all were acquitted of trials. The lynching was the last in Pennsylvania and is said to have left a permanent stain on the city's image. Story 37. I got fired from my first job bussing tables when I was like 13 for taking a dare to snort a line of Sweet and Low one day when we had no customers. The boss had heard about it and flipped his crap. Turns out it was because he was not so subtly selling tons of coke out of the shop, and it became a well-known drug front until he was busted shortly after. Wait, so he got mad and fired you for snorting Sweet and Low because it looked like coke when no one was around because I don't know, this one doesn't make a ton of sense, but sure, I guess I get it. Story 38. Oh, so many. Guy killed his cousin in a hunting accident as teens, except both were experienced hunters and the cousin was wearing orange. Few years later, the guy was arrested for killing a man and kidnapping, R-ing, and then killing his wife. Many also believed he committed another murder/arson that happened in the years between the two other incidents, but it's never been proven. A girl was abducted from her car and her body was found several days later 100 miles away. Nobody was ever arrested, although the boyfriend was accused. Also, a girl I went to high school with had an affair with her friend's dad when she was 17 and he was 45. Ick. Story 39. It's not actually a dark secret, it's something a lot of other people know, but the younger generation doesn't know. In my area, we had a mental hospital that was shut down 10 or 15 years ago, but at the time, a lot of people was killed by the way they tried to treat the patients. What I know, about 150 patients died either from trying to kill themselves or get killed by the treatments. Some of the treatments were electrocution to the brain, or removing a part of the brain. There were a lot more type of treatments, but these are the only ones I remember being told. I may just be a simple English major dropout, and I don't care to hold bad grammar against people, but you need to get a handle on the punctuation, OP. I'm too tired to do the work for you. Story 40. A girl I went to high school with vanished one day. From day one, everyone was telling the police that her ex-boyfriend had something to do with it. She already had a restraining order because he held a knife to her throat and threatened to kidnap and kill her, but with no evidence, they couldn't do anything. Over the years, several people went to the police saying that he had admitted to killing her, but they did nothing. He eventually got in trouble for threatening to kill another girlfriend and choking her and went to prison for 3 years. After prison, he came back to town and eventually asked another ex of his for a ride home from a party, and then she went missing after that night, and they found her car burned, and they arrested him again, and he has burns on his hands. A few months later, someone found a set of remains outside of town, and during the recovery, they found another set of much older remains. He killed them both, and the failure of our local police department caused the second girl to be murdered. Story 41. Our small town has something. Our China buffet would take the female employees from the restaurant across town to a massage parlor and force into giving massages/happy endings. I always suspected that some of my local China buffet and similar style restaurants were involved in trafficking people. Constantly new employees there, ones I never seen before or ever see around town, with some of the others straight up disappearing, and when asked about, they deny they even existed. Story 42. Adam Lanza. We've moved since, but F him. Yeah, that effort basically caused World War III in our household. I really wish they got him alive so he could be punished. He not only killed those children, but like all the families are screwed up because they lost a child, some have had more kids, but they realize that it doesn't fill the hole of losing another. And some parents have committed self-termination. Pretty much just left a massive gaping wound in that town. Story 43. In my hometown, maybe 10 to 20 years ago, happened something that's called today the head skull murder of disclosed town's name. Basically, a band of hobos killed a man and beheaded him, kept his severed head as a trophy. The unfortunate fate of the killed man was discovered about a year later when his daughter met by random the same person that killed her father at a local bar, and the person told her what had happened to her father. She didn't believe him until he went home and brought the rotten head to the bar and put it on the table. I knew there were going to be some really dark secrets in this, but some of the people are just absolute monsters. This is kind of depressing. I really hope we get a few more, clever bank robbers or something. Story 44. The janitor of the school in my hometown had the nickname Schimmelreiter, White Horse Rider. He got that because he snuck into nearby stables and climbed onto the horses there, naked. Once up on the horse, he started to masturbate. Got caught several times, got a bloody nose several times too. My father once got into an argument with his wife because she blamed my father for her husband's fetish because my father didn't lock his stables good enough, although knowing that her husband was his neighbor. My father, her husband, father, husband, stable father, father. I don't even know what the hell I just read there at the end. I swear, people, I'll buy you a box of punctuation if you're running low. Story 45. Not so much a secret, but the city where I grew up in eastern MA became rather infamous thanks to the opioid epidemic. One of our T-stations/neighborhoods became a memetic junkie central. That's how bad it was. There's also a number of bodies found here that have been attributed to Whitey Bulger and his gang, found buried under bridges, along beaches, even one in a tuxedo found in a car riddled with bullets that was submerged in a quarry, and a torso stuffed in plastic found in a creek, where I took part in a yearly summer sailing/kayaking program for kids in the mid-90s. Story 46. This is my sister's story. I was 5 and she was 11 at the time. I lived in Georgia for a few months while my parents were deployed there, and we stayed on base in a relatively small area. In our neighborhood, everyone knew everyone, and since ours was connected to a civilian neighborhood, we would all play together. I was on a walk with my older sister, and apparently this old man started following us. We didn't notice at first, but he started walking faster. When he got too close, my sister turned around and he walked up to a house and went up to the door. My sister started to freak out and we hurried home. She told our mom and she asked around. No one knew who that guy was. She contacted HOA president of the other neighborhood and he said the same thing. Later we found out he had tried to kidnap another kid that lived a few houses down from us. There was a police investigation and my sister had to give a statement. I'll never stop being grateful to my sister because we would have gotten taken that day. Story 47. There was this girl that was in the grade above me, and she became a teacher at the same school we both went to. She was very stuck up and thought she was better than everyone else. Apparently, she was working out at the weight room, and this underage boy came in. They go in the back. She gives him head while someone walks in on them both. You would think she would be arrested for something like this, but no. Her father was one of our football coaches / health teacher, and I'm sure he pleaded with the boy's parents to not press charges. It must have worked because she didn't go to jail. She did lose her job, though. Being privileged shouldn't pardon you for inexcusable actions. Story 48. The Crap House Baby. Young woman hid her pregnancy from everyone, ended up giving birth in the pit outhouse at the ballpark. Baby went right down into the hole, and I think it was the volunteer fire department that had to rescue him. The Crap House Baby. Yay, the baby was rescued and got a fun nickname. A story with an actual decent ending. Whomever you are, OP, I want to give you a cookie. Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day. Story 49. There was a serial killer in my hometown who was never caught in the 70s. We always believed it was one of our neighbors who was extremely creepy and met the age timeline, but there was no confirmation. The neighbor kept wolves on leashes he had purchased and bred so nobody could come near his house. He always gave my dad the creeps, and he came and snuck in our yard and tried to talk to me and my kid sister when we were 5 and 7 playing outside. And my dad had to run him out of our yard at gunpoint. When the man died without ever being convicted, but he passed on to his son a sick obsession with John Wayne Gacy, and his son ended up killing his mother and putting her in a concrete barrel under the porch. He is still in prison, and we still believe his father was that killer from the 70s, especially since he passed that on to his son, who became a murderer obsessed with serial killers. I went to high school in a very tiny town, and this guy murdered his entire family, even the dog. No one's touched the house or the cars or anything, and it's been 3 years. Story 51. My hometown has a lot of travelers, like recently shouted out on a TV show as having one of the highest number of traveler sites in our area in the UK. A few years ago, the police did a raid on a site and found 24 people being kept as slaves. They think some of them may have been slaves for over 15 years. The travelers preyed on the vulnerable, often approaching people at soup kitchens or benefits offices and offering them cash in hand for a day's work. But when they arrived at the sites, they had their hair shaved off and were kept in old horse boxes and dog kennels. A few newspapers have described the conditions as like a concentration camp. Story 52. From my wife, not me, so more like a summary. My life hasn't been eventful. When she was younger, authority found the body of one of her friend's older brothers in the canal. As far as she told me, no one exactly knows whether it was a blatant murder by a friend or self-termination. Either way, the bridge by the canal isn't high enough to kill you if you fall from it, but there's not any easy way out of the water either. Story 53. We had the crazy rich guy from the 1600s to 1700s who saw people robbing a grave one night, so he decided that when he died, he would be laid to rest in the roof of a barn behind his house. He believed he'd only be dead for 30 years, so requested that they lock the barn and put the key in his coffin so he could get out, but nobody could get in. He requested that whoever inherited his house, fortune, and belongings would have to give them back to him when he resurrected. He did actually get his wish, but of course he was never resurrected. People stole his bones, and his house is a dentist now. This is also the town where that lady went viral going ham in the alcohol aisle in Aldi a few weeks ago. How on earth do you go from, our town used to have this guy who thought he was going to resurrect himself and had special conditions for his burial and was just generally mad, to a story about a Karen screaming at Aldi. Story 54. There was an abandoned hangman's house, and every business that was set up on the same lot always ended up following. When the town planned to have it destroyed, it burned down. Story 55. About 20 or so years ago, a boy was found dead in a field. Officially, nobody knows what happened, but being a small town, the word got around that he was at his dealer's house doing drugs and died. They made sure he was dead and then dumped him in a cornfield. Story 56. A factory that produced chemicals polluted a big chunk of our territory by dumping waste in the local river, and even if that factory had been shut down 5 to 6 years ago, there are still enormous amounts of PFAS in our tap water to this day. And there are a lot of cases of cancer caused by said chemical in 40 to 60-year-olds. Story 57. I didn't grow up here, but it's close to my hometown. It was a KKK hotspot, and one of the bars was known to have a black man's head mounted on the walls. Driving through there every single time, you could feel the misery and hatred. I don't know what it is. Some places just feel wrong. Well, I friggin' never just full-on hated a whole town before, but there we go. Story 58. The school principal of a small school in a very small town got put in jail for molesting one of the female students. The judge said it was one of the worst cases of abuse he'd heard of. The worst of it for me was that the guy was my favorite teacher. Story 59. In my city, there's an amusement park that was built on top of a retired cemetery. They said it was free of coffins, but it was not true. They found a hand at the bottom of a pool. He also had a cross next to the corpse's hand. That was the day after the inauguration. When the park closed, everything was forgotten there. Several urban blowers found some strange marks on walls, and screams seemed to be heard at some ends of the park. The most terrifying thing is that there is a statue of Snow White that, according to them, was blinking and turning its head. And as if they were not enough, it is believed that a trapped child cries for help is heard in a water well. Yeah, pretty spooky. People believe it more than COVID. Ooh, boy. I need a drink. Story 60. Small Kansas town, about 16,000 people. Back in the 80s, the county built a new jail. They hired a large crew mostly made up of illegals from Mexico. As construction came to an end, immigration was called and the crew was deported without final payments being made. Story 61. I used to live in Mexico as a kid, and this is one I knew from my mom. I was 3 years old when this happened, so I'll say what my mom said. A few houses away from ours lived this older couple, husband and wife. Husband would come out during the mornings with homemade donuts to sell, whereas the wife would come during the night with tamales for sale as well. Everyone in the neighborhood knew them and liked them, and one day husband died. He had a massive heart attack, as old people do. Everyone came to give their condolences to the wife. She was destroyed, and she claimed that he had already been cremated. She kept on selling tamales, and some people complained that they tasted different. I believe it's pretty obvious what happened. That same night, some people stormed into her house and found something there. My mom won't tell me what was found, but we were informed that wife used husband's body to make tamales after he died. No! Do not ruin tamales for me. Do not try and sully one of my absolute favorite foods. God damn it. Story 62. When I was in high school, a guy was murdered who was a recent graduate. His body was dumped in the woods, and the cool kids started taking other cool kids out to see the body, and no one reported it. I heard that after that incident, it became a felony to see a dead body and not report it to the police. Story 63. Where I live, beneath the football field of the city park is rumored to be a cave used by the Japanese in World War II to store some of the cultural treasures they stole from us, among other things such as weapons and ammunition. Worth quite a fortune, supposedly. It's a small city, suburban in nature, but not very developed. The city government knows where the entrance is, but has not made any progress to enter further, as the cave is rumored to be laced with deadly traps and enough explosives to cause major damage to the surface. To deter any construction from accidentally stumbling onto it or possibly set off the explosive, the above area was made a park, and the football field is supposedly directly above the main cavern. The entrance location is thereby made classified and possibly sealed off, and anyone who was not on the government that attempted to locate the entrance had either gone missing or have found fortune elsewhere. Never to speak of the treasure and dismissing the rumors. Story 64. A 17-year-old girl was murdered in 1997. Her body was dumped close to the river. Local police did nothing to find the murderer. In fact, they were covering up for somebody. Local authorities police a few shady businessmen were also involved in cover-up. Relative and friends of the murdered girl who wanted and started their own investigation were suggested not to dig. At least one of them was found dead a day after he announced in local pub he knows who was responsible for that murder. Last year, investigation was relaunched when detectives from another part of country, not involved in local mafia-style relationships, took a look into the files. Family of this murdered girl hoped for justice and believe this crazy silence pact will be broken one day and a murderers will be put in prison. Edit. I checked. This girl was murdered in 1998, not 1997. Thank God you clarified. I wasn't buying it until then. Story 65. I moved to a tiny Amish town in Pennsylvania. 3 days after we got there, there were police across the street. Apparently, there was a multiple homicide by shotgun execution style. A few weeks later, I am having a drink in the local bar and sitting next to a few cops. Small town, there are only a handful of police. And I ask if they ever caught the killers. Their answer, well, the guys who got killed were out-of-town drug dealers, so we aren't really looking too hard. Or at all. Story 66. A female volunteer firefighter let the cat out of the bag that there apparently was, according to her, hanky-panky going on upstairs on the 3rd level of the old firehouse just above the pole. Some citizens thought that may explain some delayed responses to emergency calls, but it was never proven. Hell yeah, give me more stories about steamy firehouse romances. The only thing hotter than the flames burning the town was the passion between these two firefighters. Story 67. Does anyone remember a few years back when a bunch of people were dying of lung diseases caused by illegal THC vape cartridges? Well, turns out a guy I went to high school with was running one of the biggest THC cartridge operations in the Midwest, if not the entire country. His mom and brother were in on it too and had multiple locations where they were paying people to manufacture, pack, and distribute the cartridges. Story 68. 2 girls were maced by a man riding a bicycle. I actually used to know one of the girls. Also, there was an alleged school shooting threat at my school. I also knew someone involved in that. I guess I need new friends. Haha. Story 69. The big heads. My dad saw them himself. Huge mutated inbreds that escaped a hospital years ago. They're probably dead now, but they were real. I know it because they have records of them escaping the hospital. Yes, and if my voice hasn't tipped you off, I am one of the escaped big heads. Oh, Rocco, you're such a darling. I know at least some of you are going to get that reference, I hope. Story 70. The high school I went to in the Philippines is really, really old, founded in 1902. Rumors say it's very haunted and there are catacombs underneath with bones and stuff that connects to another old university right across the street. The main building has an underground section used for classrooms and it used to be a prison and torture chamber used by the Japanese during World War II. It's very haunted and tons of horror stories come from both teachers, staff, and students about our school. Triple that number for the main torture chamber building. Teachers who stay later than 6 p.m. would hear crying and chains rattling/dragging. Some of the doors were the same metal bars of prisons. Even the layout seems pretty prison-y. Story 71. Not precisely a small town, but my neighborhood is where the poor people could afford a house lived. The houses were the pre-made kind. Whenever a baby was born, no hospital, too expensive, and it was found lacking, they would just leave in the back until it didn't cry anymore. I only knew because one of my neighbors told me her sister had begged so bad to get her child back after they put it in the back that the family gave it back. Story 72. About 20 years ago, some guy lost his mind one night and drove his car with his family inside it off a 40-foot bridge, killing all of them. Multiple people witnessed it. They said he was driving normally, then suddenly veered off to the left and hit the gas, plowing the car through the protective wall. What's scary was the fact that he was a really good guy. He was in the town council and was loved by everyone in our community. His wife and 2 kids were also well known. Nobody had any problems with them. It just goes to show that no matter how good it looks like someone has it, you never know how they actually are inside. Story 73. The funeral director in my hometown had a bad coke habit. Instead of spending money on cremating bodies, he spent it on coke and left them in back of the winter casket storage. He'd spray them with spray-on the deodorant. Bodies were also buried in the wrong graves. Fake ashes were given to families. Drugged out funeral director sounds like a heck of a fun time. And honestly, put the bodies anywhere, so long as we can party, am I right? Story 74. When I was in elementary school, my mom's best friend's daughter slept with my mom's other best friend's husband. She was an 18-year-old senior, and he was a wrestling coach. They had a kid. Story 75. Hamilton, Ohio. We got a dude who absolutely will not stop masturbating with inflatable pool toys in public, like orcas and dolphins. It just keeps happening year after year. It's not even that funny. But after all the other crap we've read, thanks, inflatable pool toy masturbator, for brightening up my day. Story 76. There was a group of drug dealers and gun runners operating out of a house across the street from the public pool. Cops managed to raid it a couple of years ago. They lived next to several people I knew, too, who had no idea. Story 77. Not really a story, but lots of mentally challenged people go missing around here, frequently enough for me to notice and think it's a little odd. It's a small town, so most of them I know, and it's weird seeing their families/people I know so desperate to find them. It's kind of creepy. Especially since our cop aren't the most upstanding people. Used to handcuff and beat people. A couple of my family members had that happen. Story 78. Okay, I don't know if this would count, but it happened at the town's only elementary school. So apparently there was a girl who hung herself beneath the stage in the school's auditorium. Not only did she hang herself, but it was also during her graduation. Now, this was before the school became an elementary school, so it was when she was a senior instead of a sixth grader. Still pretty dark, though. Story 79. It's not a secret anymore, I guess, but a much-beloved high school teacher got caught molesting his grandson, and it turned out he'd had various student-teacher relationships ranging from inappropriate to felonious for decades. In a small community where everyone knows everyone and you can't take a crap without everyone knowing your Bristol stool score, it was shocking and heartbreaking. Story 80. Small U.S. town with a long-time pedophile operating in plain sight. He was some kind of sports team assistant coach, baseball and football, so he had plenty of contact with young boys. There were 2 self-terminations, at least, over the years, where people later assumed the dead were this guy's victims, but no one made that connection at the time. I don't know how the whole thing came to light, but when the police closed in, he barricaded himself in a motel room and shot himself. No, I was not a victim. Ironically enough, I was a Boy Scout and an altar boy at the local Catholic church. Never had a problem. Story 81. To Kill a Mockingbird is literally based on my town. Harper Lee grew up here in Monroeville, and many of the places and people were given different names. Boo Bradley was an actual person, and when the book came out and exploded, they moved off. Oh, wow. I guess I had a hunch the book was based off of actual stuff, but that's something I never really knew for sure. Sounds like that might be interesting to look further into. Story 82. In my mom's hometown, very small town, one main street with one stoplight, and back then, I don't know if they even had the stoplight, there was a string of burglaries at the nicer houses. By the time the police got there each time, the burglars were gone, and so were the expensive items like TVs. Turns out, it was the police who were doing the stealing. They'd steal from houses when they knew the owners were out of town and then would call themselves up so they could show up at their own crime scenes and act bamboozled that the burglars got away again. Story 83. Not really dark, but there was an old man who would cut, chop, and stack his own firewood all summer and fall to heat his house during the winter. One year, someone started stealing wood from his pile at night, which was really unnecessary because if they had just asked him, he probably would have given them whatever they needed. It went on for a few weeks and the local cop couldn't really do anything about it. So the old man bored holes into a few logs and filled them with black powder and plugged the bores. Like a week later, a house on the other side of town's fireplace blew out. No one said anything at all. We pretty much all agreed they deserved it. Story 84. I don't remember the details exactly, but a local high school student went missing back in the 80s. Apparently, the police chief didn't like the father of the kid, so they didn't investigate, and it went unsolved. The father went around all the time complaining about the police department and the town council, saying they covered up a murder. 15 years later, the kid's body was found next to a popular walking trail downtown. It was almost in plain sight in our downtown for 15 years. I probably walked past without noticing it at least 100 times. Story 85. In my town, there was a race riot and massacre that happened in the 20s. It has been described as the single worst incident of racial violence in American history. It was pretty much erased from history with no mention in school teachings or books. Only in the last few recent years has it come to light and being acknowledged. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.